Hi there, students. I'm XS. That's little x, little s, which stands for extra sweet, because that's what I am. I'm a Puppy-sensei, and I make Japanese language content to help you level up your abilities. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been teaching you all about various VTuber terms. I hope you have enjoyed learning a bit about the words and phrases that are pretty common within Japanese streaming culture. I think it's important to remember how much we, as modern EN VTubers, really owe to the Japanese VTubers who paved the way before us. But I also think there's somebody else that's probably an even bigger influence on basically every modern VTuber. Like it or not, I pretty firmly believe that we would not even have this industry without her. Who am I talking about? The queen herself, Hatsune Miku. I mean, perhaps it's obvious why I believe that Hatsune Miku is sort of the progenitor figure for VTubing. Then again, maybe it's not so obvious. You really don't have to look very far to see her cultural influence on VTuber art styles. Her iconic twin tails are often emulated by tons of VTubers. Heck, I almost designed my own model with twin tails. But I think at a much more meta level, Vocaloid broadly and Miku more specifically really opened the door for this incredibly interesting interplay between animation and technology. It might be a little odd to think about it now, but remember that there have often been these very strange shifts in regards to what's considered kind of more acceptable levels of anonymity online. Vocaloid really changed the music industry by opening the door of music to people who otherwise either lacked the ability or the willingness to put their own voice into the public sphere, and that's perfectly valid. Thanks to Vocaloid, we developed new ways to get sound out there by using our creativity through the lens of technology. And ultimately, I really feel that VTubing is kind of the natural visual expansion on that idea. Likewise, VTuber pioneers like Kizuna Ai made it possible for those of us who want to stream, but for any number of reasons, feel like we're unable to have our faces out there for scrutiny. You can call that cowardice if you like. I call it safety. But that's somewhat beside the point. For today, we're going to be talking about technology. We will move forward and we're going to learn a lot, so let's get into it. Ikimashou! Okie dokie. Oh, feels like it's been a minute. I gotta loosen up a bit. Mm, 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 mm. Okay, so, as I said before, today we're going to be talking about technology. As VTubers, we wouldn't be able to do much of anything at all if not for the levels of technology that we have in the modern age. And I want to respect that and talk about some terms and grammar that's going to help us continue to build a solid foundation as we continue to build our Japanese skills. So, let's start with the word for technology itself, gijitsu. So this is gijitsu technology. Now, I want to make this fairly clear actually. Remember, there's usually not just one and only one way to say something in any given language. Often, there are multiple words for the same or similar concepts, and that's the case with technology. There are, in fact, other ways to say technology in Japanese. As an example, you can also just say technology written in katakana. But honestly, I see gijitsu rather frequently, and I also think that it's kind of a cool word, so I'd like you to see why I think it's neat. So let's break it down and discuss what we're actually seeing with this kanji compound. Kanji card! So this is the gi that we see in gijitsu. It really conveys the idea of some skill or some ability. It often shows up in kanji compounds where it's conveying the idea of engaging in something hands-on, a sporting match, fine motor coordination, or works of many different types that require practice and focus. As we're seeing on the kanji card here, we have various examples at the bottom, including kyogi, a match or a bout or a single competition. Other example is tokugi, tokugi ですね, which is like your own particular special skill, tokugi. A cute cultural thing that I've noticed that I kind of think is really adorable is that often as I'm talking to some of my Japanese coworkers and they're speaking about their special skills, they will pat the inside of their forearm and make a flex with their fist. And to me, I think that that's really interesting because we can see even at the level of the kanji that there's a correlation between your skills and your manual prowess. It's the literal skill of your hands. To me, I think it's really neat that this cultural association regarding what you can do with your hands is reflected in the language at the level of the kanji radical, right? Because the kanji radical here that is used is your hands. But when my coworkers are talking about their special skills, they may be talking about things like IT or computing or engineering, and yet they still kind of pat their arm and do this flex and say, これは私の特技です. This is my special skill. Yeah? わざわざ他のことを説明するべき. There is this Japanese word, わざわざ. We see the reading waza on the kanji card, right here in gi, right? It can also be read waza. The kunyomi is waza. Yeah? And there's this word waza waza in Japanese that I just used in my previous sentence. That waza waza is usually written in hiragana, and waza waza means to do something deliberately or to go out of your way to do something. So you might assume that waza waza is related to this gi kanji. It's not. Waza waza is related to a totally different kanji. Just like, yeah, I just wanted to address that this kanji is not necessarily related to the word waza waza. Right, so now let's look at the other half of gijutsu. Okay? This jutsu is actually really fascinating to me. Jutsu appears in a ton of different compounds where it implies a specific type of art. For example, at the bottom there, we're seeing this word geijutsu. It's the very bottom, and I've translated it as the arts. But geijutsu is a cool word. It's kind of the art of art, since the ge in geijutsu means art, as in artistic talent. And that same ge from geijutsu is the same ge from geisha. We all often think about geisha as escorts in kind of like an intimate sense, but that's actually inaccurate. Geisha have always been, first and foremost, artists and entertainers. Maybe it's actually not perfectly accurate to think of jutsu as art so much as it is the practice of something. That could be why jutsu can be used to talk about surgery, as we see in the other example, jutsugo. That's a word meaning post-operative. Post-op, just like me. Jutsu itself then isn't really art so much as it is being engaged in something that requires a lot of practice and skill, which is why it shows up in another one of my favorite words, ninjutsu. Wapa! So, when we squish gi and jutsu together, it's creating a compound that means something like the practice of a technique. It's about the application of knowledge to the end of completing some specific goal, that goal basically being work. And this makes sense because even from the beginning of human history, people have been using tools as technology for the purpose of doing some work and making our lives overall easier. At least that's always been the goal. So, let's talk about some important different types of technology. First, we're going to learn the word for a machine. That word is kikai. Kikai. This specific term for machine, kikai, in Japanese, really specifically refers to a piece of machinery or an instrument that has a mechanical function, a mechanism of some kind. Personally, I see this term used a lot in technical documents that I work with on a daily basis. There are additional compounds that further show us the way that this word kind of fits into the scope of technology, such as kikaika. Kikaika, mechanization. Kikaika refers to the process by which something becomes mechanized. See that ka kanji at the end there? Right? It's kikai ka. That ka kanji can mean something like change, and it's often added to the end of nouns to create a noun compound that expresses the idea of a process becoming more like something. you can usually, but not always, translate this ka as ization, like I've done here, right? So it's mechanization. So it's machine, kikai, ka, mechanization. Yeah. The next example would be kikaiko. Kikaiko, which can mean something like a mechanist or a machinist. Yeah. This isn't a particularly common term, but kikaiko can sometimes be used as a word meaning one who works with machines. It's something I see from time to time, but I also think that there are other terms for a mechanic that are somewhat more common. Even just mekaniku in katakana, which I hear frequently in conversations with my coworkers. By the way, you could also potentially see the word machine written in katakana for machine. While this can just mean machine, I actually really often hear it used for somebody's racing car or their bike, watashi no machine, like my car that I race around in. Anyway, moving forward, let's look at an example. 最近、機械翻訳システムは非常に論議を読んでいる。I think lately the idea of machine-assisted translation has been couched within a larger debate about AI, and it's become a bit of a hot-button issue. As VTubers, we're all particularly concerned about the use of AI, particularly AI art and its implications across the field. Of course, at the root of these controversies is really the idea of a machine replacing our jobs, and I think that's a very valid concern. Who gets credit? Who has ownership over AI-generated art? How can we move into this new AI-powered environment with grace and cooperation? I don't have all the answers. But I can tell you that I'm a data girl. I love data. And in the end, that's sort of all that AI really is right now. Vastly large collections of data that work off of predictive models. It's already so ingrained in our lives that it's actually kind of hard to separate ourselves from it. The predictive text that we probably have a love-hate relationship with on our phone, that's a rudimentary data collection and distribution system that literally powers AI systems. We're all unwitting accomplices in the AI schema. But like I said, I love data. I'm a nerd in that way, so I'm on the fence about a lot of these issues. In Japanese, the concept of artificial intelligence is most often expressed through this term, jinko chino. Jinko chino. Jinko expresses the concept of something being man-made. It's literally the kanji for person plus the kanji meaning to construct or to make. And then the chino implies intellect, thought, or intelligence. It's made from a kanji meaning to know or to have wisdom, plus a kanji meaning to have a talent or to have the ability. So in Japanese, jinko chino implies man-made intelligence. Somehow I actually like that more than artificial intelligence because I think it's important to remember that no matter how powerful the algorithm becomes, we are the ones who let the genie out of the bottle. We opened Pandora's box or vase or whatever it was. If Skynet rises up against us, it's only because we're complicit in the compilation of the data that led us down this path. I'm not going to get preachy about AI, not any more than I already have, but I still think it's an important debate to consider for the future of the human species. As for myself, I'm a dog, so I feel perfectly safe. Moving right along. If we're going to think about the kinds of technologies that are really important for the VTubing world, then we must talk about the distinction between hardware and software. In Japanese, the most common terms that you're going to see to express the difference between hardware and software are hado and softo. Of course, these abbreviations are for hardware and software. As we should know by now, these terms are written in katakana because they are imported from English. Hado, of course, refers to the pieces of physical technology that we rely on to do things like VTubing. For me, that's a computer, monitors, an audio management device, a mic, a camera, a stream deck, and my lighting setup. Software, of course, well, that's actually far more complicated. Me personally, I'm using quite a number of different types of software even right now to produce this video. VTubes to capture my model, OBS to condense various capture layers, audio balancing software. Eventually, Manager Sama is going to edit this video using DaVinci Studio, not to mention additional graphical editing software to make the thumbnail, to make various little silly elements of the video. It actually takes a lot of moving parts to put these lessons together, but I suspect you already knew that. The next word we're going to learn is computer. Computer, which means computer. We're going to learn some simple katakana terms today, and one of those is the idea of your computer. Now, I want you to listen very carefully when I say this word in Japanese. Computer. Computer. Do you hear it? Computer. You tell me, is that an N sound in that katakana that we see, or is that an M sound? Computer. It sounds like an M, doesn't it? Let's consider why that is. You might think that the N sound that we normally associate with this katakana, or of course with this hiragana, is actually becoming an M sound to mimic the M in the English word computer, right? It would almost make sense, because we know that in English we clearly say computer, which is obviously an M sound. So is the Japanese language emulating the M in computer and changing the way that the N katakana is pronounced so that it sounds more like English? No. No, it's not. And we know this because Japanese has ordinarily exhibited this feature that we call sound change. In Japanese, it's called onbin desu ne. Anytime that this standalone consonant N appears before a P sound, it changes to an M sound. Compare these two words. Konbini. Konbini means a convenience store. Konbini. Campu. Campu is a camp. Konbini. Campu. If the N consonant appears before a B sound, it sounds like an N. If the N consonant appears before a P sound, it sounds like an M. That's actually because the N consonant is not an N sound. You've been bamboozled. Technically, the N consonant in Japanese doesn't have one set pronunciation, and it can actually shift between an N sound, an engma. An engma is that nasal NG sound at the end of words like sing. Or it can be an M sound, all depending on what consonant it happens to appear before. In fact, the kana for mu used to be used for all N sounds. Before the 1900s, the N hiragana and katakana were actually considered to be hentai gana, or weird characters. Moving on from that random aside about the consonant N, let's next talk about Raibu haishin. Raibu haishin. Raibu haishin means a live stream. Of course, the purpose of any of this technology that we're talking about today is to achieve the goal of live streaming. In Japanese, we use the phrase raibu haishin. The haishin kanji here really means to broadcast or a distribution. It's actually a suru verb, so when you are broadcasting, you can say haishin suru. But on its own, we often hear haishin very, very frequently for the concept of just streaming, right? A stream. Also, recently using just raibu has really picked up, so sometimes you might hear a streamer talking about their raibu, which is effectively just kind of the same thing as their stream. It's just the front part of raibu haishin. So you can almost use either one almost interchangeably. So there's sort of three terms: raibu, raibu haishin, or just haishin. All three of these can kind of just mean your stream. And you definitely can't either stream or record without your kamera. Kamera means camera. Kamera is another very simple katakana word. This word for kamera can also double as the word for your webcam. But don't get kamera confused with gamera. That's an entirely different thing. There's actually a much older and now mostly no longer used term specifically for a photographic camera, which is 写真機ですね。写真機. The 写真 here means picture, and we probably recognize the key from kikai, which we learned earlier as a machine. This is kind of cool to me, but I see this kind of construction all the time, where we get ki attached to the end of some noun to create a larger noun compound, like we see in 写真機 here. What is a 写真機? It's a picture machine. It's a machine that takes 写真, pictures. We can, in other words, often create a compound that expresses the machine that does some kind of job just by adding ki to the end of a noun, if you can create that noun using that machine, right? So, hikoki is another example. An airplane is a hikoki because it's a machine that does flight. A kinzoku tanshiki means a metal detector because it's a machine that detects metal. Kinzoku means metal. Tanshi means to detect. And then ki is machine. Yeah. But the interesting thing, at least to me, is that we don't usually translate these words with machine in English, despite the fact that that's really what ki implies. It's not a camera machine, it's not a flying machine, and it's not a metal detecting machine. In other words, when we render these Japanese terms into English, the ki kanji kind of ends up being translated as something more like the ER in words like copier. One thing that I think a lot of people don't put enough effort into with their VTubing rig is their lighting. In Japanese, illumination or lighting is shomei. Shomei means something like illumination, and shomei is made up of a kanji meaning shine and a kanji meaning bright. And shomei is actually really important with your VTuber setup, which I think a lot of people don't actually realize. The better your lighting, the better your camera is going to be able to pick up your model movements and your subtle adjustments and things like that. Like my eyebrows, see? Okay. Of course, a mic is also very necessary for recording and streaming. I think with VTubing, investing in a great mic is a really good payoff with a lot of return of investment. Maiku is the word that we usually use in Japanese for your mic. Maiku. Yeah. In the end, with VTubing, we're honestly selling ourselves quite a lot with our voices. And since your maiku is the medium through which we're capturing our voices and stuff, I think it's very, very important to have a great sound input. That's also why I have my Yamaha that allows me to adjust sound on the fly. Oh, and on that point, soundproofing. Soundproofing in Japanese is boon. Boon. Boon literally means resist sound. I would really like to hold a resist sound picket sign at the next protest I go to. I think that would be really cool. Anyway, the point is that soundproofing is important and it can really help you achieve a great sound quality when you're streaming. Hmm? Hmm. 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 Okay, well, unrelated note, Manager-sama, I actually have a small job that I want you to take care of for me. Oh, wow. That actually worked. Anyway, we've learned quite a few terms for technology today, but for today's grammar content, I actually want to circle back and talk about something that I brought up earlier. So you'll remember that I was talking to you today about waza waza. So I figured that we could talk about that for today's grammar point. Waza waza means something like to go out of one's way to do something. Similar to the grammar pattern futo, which I taught you recently in my grammar drop series, waza waza is a segment that's looking for some kind of action. so you can stick it right before a verb or in front of your whole sentence to modify that sentence in such a way that it creates the sense of going out of your way to perform the whole activity or the whole action. We're going to look at some example sentences in a moment, but before we do, I want to mention one more time what I was saying about the kanji in waza waza. So here's the kanji that's usually associated with waza waza. As is the case with plenty of Japanese grammatical structures, waza waza is one of those where we usually do not write these kanji. We usually just write it in kana, in hiragana by itself. Usually, I'm going to argue that most grammatical structures are written in hiragana because you need to be ready to conjugate them. And we know that kanji really don't appreciate being conjugated, but that's actually not the case here. Really, a lot of grammar patterns are written in kana just kind of because they are. Sometimes because they're just so common that they're used by really early language speakers, also known as children, who haven't learned kanji yet. For example, there are kanji for the verb suru and aru, but we never use them because those words are so common that it's actually just more convenient to write them out in hiragana. It's a bit like how our minds kind of tend to gloss over very common words in English because we've kind of become linguistically numb to them. Anyway, there are kanji for waza waza, and we see them here. This kanji by itself usually appears in compounds that express purpose, reason, attitude, or state of affairs. Please note, you may be wondering what that second kanji is. This is actually the same kanji twice. The second note that you're seeing there, the second little character, is just the reduplication character in kanji, right? So in Japanese, whenever you see that, it just means say the same thing again that you just said. So we see waza waza. You just repeat the waza from the first part. This kanji sometimes appears in a kanji compound like doutai, which means a state of movement, or in the phrase wazato, which means deliberate or intentional. Let's look at some example sentences that use waza waza, okay? ラーメンを食べるためにわざわざ日本に来たの? 繰り返してください. Please repeat this sentence after me. ラーメンを食べるためにわざわざ日本に来たの? Did you come all the way to Japan just to eat ramen? ラーメンを食べるためにわざわざ日本に来たの? Do you see how this waza waza form gives us the impression of going out of your way to do something? Without waza waza, this sentence would be translated like something like this. ラーメンを食べるために日本に来たの? Did you come to Japan to eat ramen? In this sentence, there's actually no sense of incredulousness and no emotional investment. It's a very simple, very straightforward question, meaning, oh, you wanted to eat ramen, so you came to Japan? But the same sentence with waza waza, ラーメンを食べるためにわざわざ日本に来たの? Really dials up the shock factor by 1,000. Just with the inclusion of waza waza here, you've created a situation where you're utterly stunned that someone would go out of their way to do a thing for such a simple purpose. Now, let me be real here. I'm not judging you if you flew all the way to Japan just to eat ramen. Ramen is delicious, obviously. Particularly so when I can find ramen that I can actually eat given my dietary health concerns. Anyway, I want to remind you of something that I was talking about in this week's grammar drop, the idea of moving grammar fragments around in your sentence. Remember, waza waza is one of those grammar points that's looking for an action or an activity, right? It can't really just appear anywhere in your sentence, and it can't appear in every sentence. It's going to appear in sentences and in places where it's taking an action. It wants to look for some kind of action. So I'd like you to compare these three sentences. Our first sentence is, ラーメンを食べるためにわざわざ日本に来たの? Our second sentence is, ラーメンを食べるために日本にわざわざ来たの? And finally, わざわざラーメンを食べるために日本に来たの? These first two sentences really are almost identical in meaning. In the case where waza precedes nihon ni kita no, the waza scopes over the entire verb phrase there. So in English, we would treat this as going out of your way to come to Japan. Everything that comes before waza is providing the reason that you did the verb. So the entire sentence becomes ramen o taberu tame ni, in order to eat ramen. Waza Nihon ni kita no? Did you go all the way out of your way to come to Japan? The second sentence really is almost identical. If waza is placed immediately before the verb, as in Nihon ni waza kita no, then the waza scopes only over that verb itself. What you went out of your way to do was to travel. To travel where? To travel to Japan. Why? To eat ramen. And in English, I really wouldn't change my translation, since we know the question being asked is still, did you really travel all the way to Japan just for this one reason? Both in Japanese and in English, the meaning of these sentences really is quite the same. However, then we get to the third example. And I'm going to be honest, I find this sentence a little bit ambiguous. In the sentence, waza ramen o taberu tame ni Nihon ni kita no, that waza segment could be scoping over the whole entire sentence, or it could be scoping only over the ramen o taberu bit of the sentence. If waza scopes over the entire sentence, then the meaning is, did you really go out of your way in order to travel to Japan and eat ramen? Do you understand the difference in nuance between this and the first two sentences? With waza in this position, the implication is not that you went out of your way to travel to Japan to eat ramen, but rather that you went out of your way to travel to Japan at all. In the first two cases, you wanted to eat ramen, you hadn't planned on traveling to Japan, but you decided to go ahead and go out of your way to travel all the way to Japan just so that you could eat some ramen. But with waza in the front, the nuance feels like you went out of your way entirely for the purpose of both going to Japan and eating ramen. It's both actions that are important to this third sentence. However, that's where the ambiguity comes in. See, there's another interpretation of the third sentence where waza scopes only over ramen o taberu. And I'll be honest, I think this interpretation is not perfectly grammatical. I think it might be something that you might hear conversationally, but I don't think it's entirely accurate, grammatically speaking. Meaning, I don't think there's actually all that much ambiguity here. You could make an argument for translating this sentence as, did you come to Japan and then go out of your way to eat ramen? But honestly, I don't think that that's how I would say that sentence in Japanese. If I were going to say such a sentence like that, I would probably write it like this. 日本に来て、そしてわざわざラーメンを食べるの? So that would mean something more like, did you come to Japan and then go out of your way just to eat ramen? I still think this sentence actually sounds a little bit dubious, both at a semantic and a grammatical level, but I can't really put my finger on why I don't like the sentence grammatically. Well, that's not really the point. I actually would be very interested in knowing if anybody looks at that sentence and, like me, thinks, I'm not sure about the grammar there. If you want to explain it to me, I am happy to learn, always. Anyway, with this waza grammar point, we often associate the idea of going out of your way to do something with things like favors and kindnesses done for us by other people. For that reason, we're really frequently going to see waza used in situations like this sentence. わざわざ空港まで運転してくれなくてもいいです。わざわざ空港まで運転してくれなくてもいいです。This sentence really translates to something like, it's okay to not drive me all the way to the airport. That waza waza part here is really meaning something like, please don't overexert yourself too much or go to the trouble of doing something just for me. In fact, with this use of waza waza in mind, I often see it in very, very small phrases like this one. Waza waza arigato. Yeah, waza waza arigato. Thanks for going out of your way. Here, the heavy lifting being done by waza waza is implying that the thing that you're thankful for is that someone went out of their way to do something. So your appreciation of their action is increased both by the kindness of the activity and from the fact that you know or you can assume that the person took great pains to help you out or to do something kind for you. This is our last example of waza waza for the day. This sentence is, 日本語を教えたかったからわざわざ VTuber になりました. This is also a true sentence. I became a VTuber because I wanted to teach Japanese. That was my goal, and I'm happy with where I am. I am almost at my 1-year streamiversary, and I'm super excited about that. In this sentence, though, waza waza is creating the implication that my route to becoming a VTuber was surprising or unconventional, and I think we can all agree with the fact that I'm a pretty weird little dog, and that's okay. But my VTuber story is an odd one. I became a VTuber because I kept making appointments with people. People kept asking me, will you teach me Japanese? And I would make an appointment and I would make time out of my day, and then they wouldn't show up, or it would fall through, or they would ghost me, or there were all kinds of reasons that people ultimately decided not to take lessons from me. That's okay, but in the end, so many times I rearranged my schedule that I just decided, you know what? I'm going to put my lessons online. I wanted to put my lessons online. I didn't feel safe using my face, and I was like, there's this VTubing thing. I think I'm going to do that, and I'll make Japanese lessons with a VTuber. I'll use an avatar, and that way I can feel more safe, and I don't have to put my face out in the public sphere. And that's a bit of a weird story. It's sort of a backdoor way to get into VTubing. And that's why here in this sentence, I'm using waza waza, to go out of your way, which can also in some cases mean something like to go about things in a backwards or very unconventional method. I'd like to say thank you all for coming to today's class. I hope you learned a little bit about technology and about the kinds of devices and processes that go into being a VTuber and stuff. I'm still really enjoying this new lesson format that I'm doing, but please always remember that I'm open to your kind of format suggestions. If there's ever anything at all that you want to say, or that you want to talk about, or that you want me to do lessons on, please don't hesitate to let me know. I'm always happy to chat with you or to address your concerns. I've said it a bunch already, but I really care about your learning and I want to help everyone chase their stars. Speaking of stars, here's a gold star for the day for being such a diligent student. I'll see you next time. Mata ne!